Today on the Project Nomad, we go over how I made these bolt-on sliders for this 3rd gen 4runner. But before we get started, please like, comment, and subscribe.
With sliders, I tend to start with the main tube. It's usually the easiest to figure out. Just measure out the length of the rockers and then cut out the appropriate material.
So creating the mounts to go onto the frames, you can either weld them on or you can drill and tap. I really prefer bolt-on sliders over anything else because it allows you to either remove them to get access to something else, transfer them, or even modify them off of the frame or the vehicle for any particular reasons. That being said, so what I like to do with creating mounts, at least for some bolt-on sliders, so I'm just basically going to measure the flattest, straightest portions I can find. So it's going to be really convenient. The majority of the frame rail is flat, and what I'm going to do is measure the height and the width so I can make an L bracket that basically locks onto like the frame rail, something like this, how my hand is positioned. I can run several bolts in several locations and have it secured very well onto the frame and distribute the weight and the stress across the larger portion of the frame. And with the 3rd gen 4runner, I believe it is, well, it's roughly 5.5 inches tall, 3 inches.
The mounts for this set of sliders are being cut out of 1/4 inch steel. Generally, 1/4 inch is a good base material to weld sliders onto. It's got a lot of meat, so you're not burning through the material immediately, and it's sometimes thicker than the actual frame that these things are being attached to, so it's a very good medium for a lot of rigs. So I cut these plates out of the 4-inch strap that I just had, and I scored them right around here at the 3-inch mark, so that when I put them in a brake or a vise so that I can start bending it, it's going to start bending along the score mark instead of somewhere random. This is the best way that I find to have a very straightforward brake on a lot of straight straps. So I'm going to bend these up, but before that I'm going to start putting 1/8 holes in certain spots. I can transfer a center punch through the 1/8 inch holes and start marking off where on the frame do I need to drill, then sizing up so that I can use a self-cutting bolt, and that's how I'm basically gonna figure out the spacing for these things. It's not that hard, it's pretty simple, and it's a little bit of a cheat way to figure out where you're supposed to drill holes if you can't use the factory holes or if there aren't enough factory holes in that exact position. This is what I mean that I'm using self-tapping screws and just overlaying these things underneath. What I'm essentially doing is getting these things mounted to where I want them to be on the frame, and then doing a transfer punch. That transfer punch then indicates where I should be drilling, and then, well, I drill out to the size that I need to, which in this case is 5/16 for a 3/8 bolt, and then I'm using these self-tapping bolts to basically, I don't really have to use a tap. So when I replace these things with grade A bolts, it's a very easy transfer. And to be honest, this isn't unheard of. White Knuckle Off-Road, they make their sliders in a similar fashion. They tell you you're going to be drilling into your frame and then using their self-tapping bolts to cut into said hole. And to be honest, their sliders are really good in my opinion. So this isn't a bad option to mount them. This is basically what I'm trying to accomplish here right now. I got most of this side done, and this is the last one I'm just going to be mounting, and then I'm going to be transferring over to the other side and repeating the process there. Bringing you guys back, I got all the plates mounted onto the frame on both sides. There's 3 and 3 on each, 4 bolts per plate, 12 on one side and then 12 on the other. Now these things are actually ready for me to start putting on the legs so that we can mount up the actual tubes. I'll show you the main rub tubes right now. These are the legs that I'm going to be welding onto the mounting plates that I currently have on the frame. These are simple 2x2 tube by 1/4 inch wall, roughly 6 inches long, and they're going to be welded onto the plates, followed by the actual main tubes. These are 2x3 by 1/4 wall tubes that I have roughly 5 feet long, and all I did was roughly plate them in so that I can actually just get this thing mounted on. I'm going to be positioning these things with large magnets that I'm going to have basically lining these things up underneath onto the plates themselves, and then I'm going to be tacking them in and probably just actually putting a really solid bead on 2 sides and then hopefully capping it off on top as well, and then doing the exact same thing for the main tubes when I get them in position. Not using the magnets, but actually using some jack stands and some platforms that I have that I'm pretty sure you've seen on the channel before. And just getting this thing into position so that once it's welded, we're good. We don't have to worry about positioning anymore. And these things are going to be positioned more towards the back because the issue that we have with 3rd gen 4runners is that when we move to bigger tires, like 35s and bigger, we have to clear or tub the firewall in order to have clearance for larger tires, unless you have some really expensive long travel kit, which we don't have access to at the current time. So we're going to deal with what we have and just plan for that in the future. So let me get started. In practice, this is one of the easiest ways for me to attach the legs to the plates without making dedicated jigs or having CNC elements introduced into the build process. And while this process is not perfect, it does get the job done and it's reliable. So I got the main tube welded on. I got it welded on both sides of the legs and partially on the top. Now all I have to do is tack some on the bottom. Hopefully nothing warps. If not, I'm just gonna be grinding the bolt holes a little bit larger so that it can compensate for the warpage, so I don't actually have to re-drill any holes or have to worry about making new mounts. This is technically a functional slider at this point. Just need to weld up everything else and gusset it, and it's good. Rubber rails are going to come in later, but I'm just going to get to the other side and show you when both of these things are done. For the rubber rails, I usually bend up my own tube, but if you don't have your own bender, you can get creative with it and figure out a way to get the same shape and design as if you had your own bender. However, bending them up in single sections usually creates better structural integrity than multiple pieces welded together. I managed to get the rock sliders actually finished completely. Sliders themselves were done previously and I painted them up, but I ended up actually getting the tubing for the rub rails and I just created them really quick. It is the standard pattern that I use, just a straight piece into a little bit of a kick out. It's just a standard template that I use. We primarily use our rock sliders as steps. These things are a little bit longer or a little bit more extended out than what you would find with some other rock sliders, but for the most part, we're not rock crawling on a daily basis. So having these things actually be useful as steps is what we kind of want to do. Both sides are done. All I'm going to do now is just get these things mounted onto the 4runner. And I'll give you a complete look after they're mounted up. Now if everything was done right, bolting these sliders on should just be a case of lining up the holes and threading the bolts through. If not, it's time for a die grinder and opening up those relief holes. But I did check the fit after the legs and the main tube were welded on, so this was a cakewalk for me. It's been a few days now since the 4runner sliders were installed, but here are the results of the installation. The sliders coating has held up pretty well over constant stepping on and off, and because of how wide the sliders are, it's pretty easy to little bird yourself onto the side of the rig. And these things are securely mounted. There's no vibration at all. You can actually rock the entire vehicle with just pushing on the sliders. The entire thing rocks. I haven't replaced the cutting bolts on the sliders yet to grade 8 hardware, but the benefit of having these kinds of slider is that I can replace them at any given time. Overall, the sliders are what we wanted, and these things suit what we want to do with the rig in the near future. So with that is our front bumper. Our sliders are done. The front bumper still has a few modifications that we want to do because we've had it for a few weeks now and we have some things that we want to change up. So we're going to be taking that thing off and modifying it. But as for large modifications that are left on the 4runner, high clearance rear bumper and having a set of swing outs, adding a roof rack so we can actually mount some excess gear on top that we don't necessarily need inside, and having awnings if we actually want to go that way. Yeah, that's the current state of the 4runner as it stands right now. So please like, comment, and subscribe. Anything helps to grow this channel. And until next time, be safe and tread lightly.